advantages in the literature that are reported, such as pain and patient satisfaction, nausea. I think everybody can maybe appreciate the safety profile that this might give to a general anesthetic. Well, why did I decide then to do a systematic review on looking at how long a patient stays in the recovery room? This is a very selfish reason, because I thought my colleague was wrong. We were having a heated argument one day about this technology, and it was over lunch one day between cases, and he was adamant that this technology wasn't going to do what it reported to do, and honestly I was pretty adamant that I felt like it did do what it was reported to do. So we all do literature searches every day in our practice, whether you know it or not. My favorite place to literature search is Google. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. It's a great search engine. But you can go, you need an answer to a question. So you go to Google, because everybody goes to Google, and you look it up. Well, the first 5 things on Google may say one thing, and the next 5 things may say something else. It doesn't matter. You read the first or the second one, right? And that's your opinion. So we do that as clinicians. We do that as academicians. We do that as people who want to take information and use it, whatever it may be. It may be the best recipe for chocolate cake, or it may be the best way to keep the patient from waking up on the operating room table. And that could be the extremes of what we're looking at. Well, what I found was, clinically, people are telling me if I can give them just the right amount of anesthesia, not too much, not too little, just right, it would kind of make sense, common sense, that they would wake up quicker after their surgery and ultimately be able to go home or go out of the recovery room faster than the same patient who maybe was overdosed on anesthesia, or the patient who didn't get enough anesthesia and woke up really, really hurting or maybe really, really anxious because they had some recall of their surgery. So that kind of makes sense, at least from just kind of thinking about it. But if you go to the literature and you look, for every article that says they go home quicker if you use this technology, there's another article that says, no, we don't really find that. And haven't we all found that in our clinical practice? No matter what you're looking up, it doesn't matter. You find as many things supporting what you want to do clinically with your patient as not supporting what you've decided to do. Right? I mean, we all see that. And so how do you then make a determination as a clinician at the bedside saying, do I do intervention A or intervention B or intervention C, or did none of those work and I've got to come up with my own intervention? So because of these conflicting reports in the literature, I decided I was going to embark on this systematic review. And for those, and Debbie's going to talk a little bit about what a systematic review is, but essentially it's kind of the granddaddy of meta-analysis literature review. It looks at everything that's ever been published in this area, and we put it all together and come up with some sort of an idea or conclusion. And that's where that usable, tangible results come from. Theoretically, as of the day this thing was published, which is supposed to be next week, this is the most up-to-date, exhaustive information available on this topic. Now, there may be studies that are underway right now that I didn't have access to. But technically, right now, this is it. This is sort of what it is. There's nothing else out there because, trust me, I looked at everything that was written in the world, I think. So what is the process of a systematic review? Well, through the Joanna Briggs Institute, you start with the training. A lot of you have undergone the systematic review training, and then you formulate a question. Once you find that question, you go out and you do kind of an initial literature search. This is equated sort of to the Google search. You go out and you go to a few databases and you look and see what's out there. And that's when I found there's really not a lot out there that is definitive one way or the other. It's sort of all over the board. And that's why I decided, you know what, we need to combine all this information and figure out what it really means. Then you develop a protocol. A protocol is nothing more than a roadmap, an idea of what you're going to do. What kinds of studies are you going to include? What is your systematic review going to look at? How are you going to kind of go through the process? Once your protocol has been written, it's sent to JBI. It's peer reviewed. It's either approved or not approved. And what's really cool about the protocol piece in JBI is once it's approved, I own the intellectual property to that idea for about a year. Within that year, I either got to do the review or somebody else can come along and do it. But once my protocol was approved, anybody else in the world who wanted to do my topic, their protocols would have been denied because there was a review in progress. And that's kind of neat. And if you're thinking about doing, and those of you that have done research before know, there's nothing more frustrating than getting 95% of the way through a project. It may have taken a month or a week or 10 years, and you get your professional journal in the mail and you open it up and the first article in there is exactly what you just spent 8 years of your life working on. So this is kind of neat because it protects your idea to some extent. After your protocol's developed, this is the part where everybody goes, oh, I don't want to do a systematic review. It's the detailed literature search, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a minute. Once you pull all your articles, you assess them for methodological quality, because we all know, unfortunately, there are some really poorly written, poorly designed, poorly articulated articles that have been published in really great journals, right? So you got to figure out, is that article really going to work for you or not? You extract the information, you analyze it, you write it up, and then you submit it to JBI, and hopefully, ultimately, it gets accepted. So here was my question. I said, does the use of intraoperative brain activity monitoring affect the post-anesthesia care unit length of stay? In other words, if I use this technology when I give them an anesthetic, will they go home quicker? Will they stay in the PACU longer? Or does it really matter one way or the other? I specifically avoided brands because just like there's different brands of cars, it doesn't really matter what brand. All the technology does the same stuff. And I specifically avoided particular values. Remember I told you that kind of sweet spot, 40 to 60? I didn't really, in this review, I didn't really care what that number was. All I wanted to determine was if you use this thing appropriately, does it make a difference in their recovery rate? So when I did my initial literature search, when I was trying to develop my protocol, I found, like we talked about, there were lots and lots of conflicting reports. Lots of articles in healthcare are not written in English. And as you know, because whether it's good or bad or indifferent, there's a lot of regulation to healthcare research in the United States. And so no matter what field you're in, mine being anesthesia, there are lots and lots of studies, especially drug studies and equipment kind of studies where it's a new device or a new product that has to go through a lengthy FDA approval process in the US, but perhaps in Japan or Korea or Europe, a lot of the European nations, that process is not as lengthy. So a lot of the research that's done on novel healthcare related things is done in Europe, which is great, except I don't speak European. Any of the European languages at all, I barely speak English. So for me, that was a huge limiting factor. I couldn't have the articles that were published in French and Swedish and German, but they're out there. So, and there were lots and lots of articles on pediatric patients. This is a technology that is highly used in pediatrics. I'm not a pediatric anesthesia provider by profession, and so to me it was not an area of interest. So I decided not to look at those. That was a decision that I made as a researcher. It was, I don't know right or wrong, it was just that at some point you got to draw the line, otherwise you'd still be reading articles. Or Alicia and I would still be sitting in the library. So I developed my protocol, and what I realized first was, and what I would encourage all of you to do if you're thinking of participating in a systematic review, is do not solve every healthcare problem that's ever existed in the entire world with one systematic review. Especially for me, I was as much interested in the outcome of this review as I was the process of going through it, the kind of systematic, rigorous, step-by-step, step one, then step two, then step three. So I specifically looked at kind of a simple question. I mean, really, I looked at, was it used or wasn't it used? And how long did that patient remain in the recovery room? And no matter where you are, you measure that in minutes. There's really not a lot of ambiguity there, right? So I found that there were multiple studies with lots and lots of conflicting reports. But it really kind of piqued my interest in the question, because the more I found that kind of was arbitrary and I wasn't sure I could go either way, really meant that, hey, this might be meaningful, because we can't really look at the literature and say this is good. So I equate this back to oxygen and a heart attack. It's pretty clear, right? If a patient's having a heart attack, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of studies that were published that say oxygen isn't helpful. Right? So that might not lend itself really well to systematic review, because it's kind of one of those, duh, right? But this is one of those where we didn't know a clear answer. So I thought it would be really cool to combine all this information and see what happened. So I submitted my protocol to JBI. I had one revision, which was not incredibly lengthy, and it took me about 2 weeks to get my protocol approved. So that was all pretty easy, honestly, because number one, I was interested in the topic and I kind of knew how to go about that initial literature search on my own.